Hi, everybody. This is S.J. Thomason with Truth Matters. And I should be starting it with the same kind of thing that Pope Leo XIV said and Bishop Barron, peace be with you. Those were the first words of Jesus when he appeared to the 12, the apostles, the followers of his after he resurrected. So the big question is, why were some ancient Jews so blinded against Jesus? Why were they? You remember there were some who weren't. Of course, Jesus himself is a Jew, and his 12 apostles were Jewish, and his mother and father embraced the Jewish customs, embraced all of that as reported in the Bible quite a bit. But some refused to accept him, and in fact, that's the reason why they considered him blasphemous and they called for his crucifixion. But it goes back to a really interesting deuterocanonical, or as Protestants would say, apocryphal book in the Wisdom of Solomon. What did the Wisdom of Solomon say? Really interesting stuff. It said, "Let us lie in wait for the righteous man, because he is inconvenient to us and opposes our actions." Now, before I read the rest of this, just note, Wisdom of Solomon was part of the Dead Sea Scrolls. It was likely composed maybe the 2nd or 3rd century before Christ by what they considered friends of Solomon. But here's what it says. Who does this sound like? "Let us wait for the righteous man, because he is inconvenient to us and opposes our actions. He reproaches us for sins against the law and accuses us of sins against our training. He professes to have knowledge of God and calls himself a child of the Lord. He became to us a reproof of our thoughts. The very sight of him is a burden to us, because his manner of life is unlike that of others and his ways are strange. We are considered by him as something base, and he avoids our ways as unclean. He calls the last end of the righteous happy and boasts that God is his father. Let us see if his words are true, and let us test what will happen at the end of his life. For if the righteous man is God's child, he will help him and will deliver him from the hand of his adversaries. Let us test him with insult and torture, so that we may find out how reasonable he is and make trial of his forbearance. Let us condemn him to a shameful death, for according to what he says, he will be protected." Thus they reasoned, but they were led astray, for their wickedness blinded them, and they did not know the secret purposes of God, nor hope for the wages of holiness, nor discern the prize for blameless souls. For God created us for incorruption and made us in the image of his own eternity. But through an adversary's envy, death entered the world, and those who belong to his company experience it. Okay, really interesting stuff. That is obviously a reference of Jesus. It's referring to Jesus, and it was in the Wisdom of Solomon 2:20-24 that I just read to you. So it's very interesting. Take a look at that. You want to make sure that you're following God. Now, it's interesting because there were some Pharisees who immediately recognized that the followers of Jesus could be of God. Gamaliel is a good example from the book of Acts. Gamaliel was a very powerful Pharisee, and he said, not to imprison people like Peter and other apostles. You wanted to know if their faith is of God, you will not be able to stop them. And of course, that turned out to be true. Christianity exploded. By 313, when it was legalized by Constantine, Christianity had already been with 5 to 6 million people, according to historians like Jeffrey Wawrow, who wrote a book recently, a historical text, which was signed by 40 different historians from all around the world. And after Christianity was legalized, around, say, 350, 360, somewhere between 50 and 60 million people embraced the faith. So many people came to Christianity. It was unstopped. And how is it possible that a traveling Jew back in the Galilee and backwater part of the world, in a little obscure part of the world, could go on to be the voice of truth throughout the world? Well, nothing's impossible with God. That's the amazing thing. So let's look at some of the things that were out there with respect to information that the ancient Jews would have had. And let's take a look at if you could find this information, some of it inside the Bible, some outside the Bible, and if it would bring you to faith. If you lived back then, just think about it. Now, the Sanhedrin was written after Jesus. It was put together, but it's interesting because they talked about, number one, it made a reference of, in case some, like Muslim faith, thinks that Jesus was not hung on the cross himself. They think that God actually sort of fueled us and someone else maybe took his place. But the Sanhedrin, even the Jewish people in ancient times, acknowledged that Jesus was hung on the cross, as did people like Josephus, Tacitus. Tacitus said that Jesus paid the ultimate price. And in the Sanhedrin, the ancient Jews said this in 43a. On Passover Eve, they hung the corpse of Jesus of the Nazarene, after they killed him by way of stoning, and a crier went out before him for 40 days, publicly proclaiming, Jesus the Nazarene is going out to be stoned because he practiced sorcery, incited people to idol worship, and led the Jewish people astray. Anyone who knows of a reason to acquit him should come forward and teach it on his behalf. And the court did not find a reason to acquit him, and so they stoned him and hung his corpse on Passover Eve. And of course, he had a very good person, as predicted in the book of Isaiah, Joseph of Arimathea, a rich man, had his own tomb, had his own burial cloth, very wealthy man with a wealthy burial cloth, as evidenced by the Shroud of Turin. The shroud itself is a very good quality cloth. And he was buried, and of course, he rose on the third day, on Sunday. So here's what Sanhedrin 99 says. And this is where the Jewish people in ancient times were wondering about the Messiah, wondering about all the prophecies that they knew about in the Bible and whether or not there was a Messiah coming. Because, as I said, many rejected Jesus, although many did accept him. Those who accepted him were among his apostles, also friends and followers of Christ in the early centuries, who oftentimes were murdered very viciously because they believed in Jesus. Here's what Rabbi Hillel says. There is no Messiah coming for the Jewish people, as they already ate from him, as all prophecies relating to the Messiah were already fulfilled during the days of Hezekiah. Now, Hezekiah was around the 8th century before Christ. He was a king. He's in Isaiah's time. But Rav Joseph says, may the master forgive Hillel for stating matters with no basis. With regard to Hezekiah, when was his reign? It was during the first temple period, whereas Zechariah ben Berechiah, the prophet, prophesied during the second temple period and said, rejoice greatly, daughter of Zion. Shout, daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king will come to you. He is just and victorious, lowly, and riding upon a donkey and upon a colt, the foal of a donkey. That's said in Zechariah 9:9. In the generations after Hezekiah, there are prophecies about both redemption and the coming of the Messiah. Very wise for Rabbi Yosef to have noticed. And because he probably also remembered Micah. Now, Micah was around the time of Isaiah. Micah 5:2 even told us where Jesus would be coming from. But you, O Bethlehem, Ephrathah, who are too little to be among the clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who is to be ruler in Israel, whose coming forth is from of old, from ancient days. Now, recall when King Herod had heard about the Messiah, he asked where the Messiah would be born. And of course, he was going to have all of the babies in Bethlehem killed when he found out that the Messiah was to be born in Bethlehem. That's why Jesus, Mary, and Joseph had to flee to Egypt. Here's what they also knew. Here's what the ancients also knew. They knew in Isaiah 9:6 that it was going to be a person. It's interesting because in the Gospels, it talks about people saying, well, he came from, Joseph. He came from Mary. We know his family. How can this be? As if he were going to come out of, just thin air. But we were told in Isaiah 9:6 that he would be a person. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Holy Spirit, Mighty God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, Everlasting Father, the Father, and the Prince of Peace, the Son. Notice the Trinity is right there in Isaiah 9:6. Very cool stuff. So they knew that he was going to become, he was going to be born of a virgin, as in Isaiah 7:14. And that's also referenced in the Septuagint, which was the text that the ancient Jewish people referred to in Jesus's time. In fact, all throughout the New Testament, there are many references to the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Hebrew that started being produced around 3-4 centuries before Jesus. And so they knew that there was going to be of a virgin. The word that they used in Greek was parthenos. Of a virgin, there would be a birth. It would be a miraculous thing. And of course, the Virgin Mary gave birth to Jesus. Malachi 3:1. Now, Malachi, according to Protestants, is the last book because they believe that there is a 400-year period of silence. In the Catholic belief system, there are many books that were written between that 400 years, like Maccabees. But anyway, here's what Malachi 3:1 says. Behold, I send my messenger, and he will prepare the way before me. And the Lord whom you seek will suddenly come to his temple. And the messenger of the covenant in whom you delight, behold, he is coming, says the Lord of hosts. Note that this was during the second temple period. First temple was built by Solomon around 1,000 years before Jesus. Second temple was built completed in 516. The first one was destroyed in 586. Second was completed in 516. The second one was destroyed in 70 by the Romans. What does that mean? That means that when Malachi wrote this during the Second Temple period, he had told us that the Messiah is going to appear in the temple. The temple is destroyed in 70. Therefore, it follows that he had to have appeared before that, and he did. Jesus was probably born between 2 and 3 BC. I've made many videos on why I came to that determination, but he was probably born around there. He started his ministry probably around the year 30 AD, and he was crucified on April 3rd of 33 AD, according to numerous scholars. So this, obviously, he appeared in the temple somewhere between 30 and 33. Now, in a few minutes, don't leave, because I'm going to show you what Josephus said was going on around this period of time when Jesus started appearing. Really amazing stuff. I'm going to show you what Josephus said. Daniel even told us, and the ancient Jews knew this, they considered Daniel a prophet, according to Josephus and Jesus, and other people referred to Daniel as a prophet because he prophesied. And one of the things he prophesied was the exact timing of Jesus. That's why the ancient Jewish people were looking for a Messiah around his time. A lot of fakes came out there. We heard about a lot of fakes, like Theudas and Judas and other people who faked as if they were the Messiah. We, of course, had also at the Bar Kokhba issue in the 1st or 2nd century AD. We had that whole thing with another supposed Messiah. But during Jesus, when Jesus came, it was predicted by Daniel in 9:24-27. He said 70 weeks or 77s are decreed about your people in your holy city to finish the transgression, to put an end to sin and to atone for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal both vision and prophet, and to anoint a most holy place. Know therefore and understand that from the going out of the word to restore and build Jerusalem to the coming of an anointed one, a prince, there shall be 7 weeks or 77 sevens. Then for 62 weeks it shall be built again with squares and moat, but in a troubled time. And after the 62 weeks an anointed one shall be cut off and shall have nothing. And the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Its end shall come with a flood. And to the end there shall be war. Desolations are decreed. And he shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, and for half the week he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering. And on the wing of abomination shall come one who makes desolate until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. Now, this passage has multiple fulfillments and partial fulfillments during Jesus' time. So notice here, the call to rebuild Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem had been destroyed by the Babylonians. Again, the temple was destroyed in 586. The King Cyrus, the Medo-Persian king, basically took over in 539 BC, and he allowed in 535 BC the temple's foundation to begin and the temple to be restored. So the temple was restored by 516. But then between 2 other times, the city of Jerusalem, like you see here, it's not just the temple, it's the whole city. So the city of Jerusalem, to rebuild that came about 2 times in 444 and in 457 BC. That came about, those calls to rebuild Jerusalem, and it was rebuilt. And so we're looking for 77s or 483 years after that. Now, 483 years after 444 to 457 puts us in a window of time that brings us to Jesus's being cut off in 33 AD. Very interesting stuff. So we had this portended by Daniel. And of course, after that, just as Daniel said, there was a huge destruction of the temple in the year 70. The Romans completely annihilated the temple, knocked down, fire, everything else. It was a terrible time. And Jesus predicted that the temple was going to be destroyed himself. And that's one of the reasons why the very liberal Bible scholars claim that many of the Gospels were written after the year 70, because they see an obvious prophecy and they know the theological implications. But I digress. Here's what else the ancient Jews knew. This, again, was written after Jesus, but here's what it says. And Rabbi Yohanan says, the son of David will come only in a generation that is entirely innocent, in which case they will be deserving of redemption, or in a generation that is entirely guilty, in which case there will be no alternative to redemption. This is in 98a. He may come in a generation that is entirely innocent, as it is written, and your people also shall be all righteous. They shall inherit the land forever, in Isaiah 60:21. He may come in a generation that is entirely guilty, as is written, and he saw that there was no man and was astonished that there was no intercessor. Therefore, his arm brought salvation to him and his righteousness. It sustained him, in Isaiah 59:16. And it is written, for my own sake will I do it. For how should it be profaned? And my glory I will not give it to another. Isaiah 48:11. But here's the follow-up. Listen in, this is good stuff. Rabbi Alexandri says, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi raises a contradiction between two depictions of the coming of the Messiah. It is written, there came with the clouds of heaven one like unto a son of man, and there was given him dominion and glory and a kingdom. His dominion is an everlasting dominion in Daniel 7:13-14. And it is written, behold, your king will come to you. He is just and victorious, lowly, and riding upon a donkey, and upon a colt, the foal of a donkey, in Zechariah 9:9. Rabbi Alexandri explains, if the Jewish people merit redemption, the Messiah will come in a miraculous manner with the clouds of heaven. If they do not merit redemption, the Messiah will come lowly and riding upon a donkey. Of course, Jesus came lowly and riding upon a donkey in the Passion Week. He was accepted into Jerusalem and hailed as the Messiah. People recognized him at that point. And that was because the Jewish people were not without sin. You know, it didn't the Christians believe he will come again in glory to judge the living and the dead. So it is written, Daniel 7, we are going to all witness him coming in glory to judge the living and the dead, and his kingdom will have no end. Now, just notice that the four kingdoms of Daniel also pointed to this. Daniel, again written in the 6th century BC, prophesied that there would be four kingdoms. He was living in the Babylonian kingdom, which was destroyed in 539 by the Medo-Persian kingdom. And that reigned for a while. And then the Greek kingdom under Alexander the Great around the 3rd century BC came about, as predicted by Daniel, who even named Greece. And then he said a fourth kingdom would come, and out of that there would be a kingdom that you would never destroy. And of course, that was a reference to Jesus, who came out of the Roman Empire. And he is reigning, and we are in the Messianic era today. Sanhedrin 99 says, and that is the background of the following exchange, as a certain heretic said to Rabbi Abahu, when will the Messiah come? Rabbi Abahu said to him, he will come when the darkness will enshroud these people, i.e. you. The heretic said to him, are you cursing me for no reason? Rabbi Abahu said to him, I am merely relating to you a verse that is written, for behold, the darkness shall cover the earth and fog the peoples, but the Lord shall shine upon you, and his glory shall be seen upon you. Now, during Jesus' crucifixion, notice that they thought that there was some sort of an eclipse in the sky, but the timing during the Passover would not be conducive to a solar eclipse. In other words, somehow the sun, the light of the sun was covered in a way that it was completely dark. And that is probably one of the reasons that the Roman centurion who had stabbed Jesus in his side and saw the blood in the water and saw the miracles surrounding Jesus, saw the fact that there was an earthquake, saw the fact that there was darkness, said, truly, this is the Son of God. And he ended up being martyred for his beliefs. But what else did the Jewish people believe? This is the super interesting thing that I had not heard about until a few years ago when I had a Messianic Jew on my channel, and he told me about this. Josephus was a Jewish historian. He had actually betrayed his own people. He was writing stuff for the Romans, and he was writing books about the Jews. And a lot of them put Jewish people into a very good light because those were, of course, his people. He was not a follower of Jesus, but he did notice some interesting things happening right around the time when Jesus started his ministry, around the year 30. Notice 30 is 40 years before the destruction of the temple in 70. Here's what he noticed. Thus were the miserable people persuaded by these deceivers, and such as belied God himself, while they did not attend nor give credit to the signs that were so evident. He's referring to, of course, he saw the destruction of the temple, and he said that there were signs that the temple was going to be destroyed. So here's what he said. And did so plainly foretell their future desolation. But, like men infatuated, without either eyes to see or minds to consider, did not regard the denunciations that God made to them. Thus there was a star resembling a sword, which stood over the city, and a comet that continued a whole year. Thus also before the Jews' rebellion. Now notice this. Josephus is writing during a time when he's living. So there were people who could say he's lying, or people who could say he's telling the truth. He didn't have a bunch of people saying he's lying and making something up about seeing a sword in the sky or a comet. It's interesting. This is during his time, okay? So the people were alive, contemporary to him as he's writing this. Thus also before the Jews' rebellion and before those commotions which preceded the war, when the people were in great crowds to the feast of unleavened bread, on the 8th day of the month Xanthicus, or Nisan, and at the 9th hour of the night, so great a light shone around the altar and the holy house that it appeared to be bright daytime, which lasted for half an hour. This light seemed to be a good sign to the unskillful, but was so interpreted by the sacred scribes as to portend those events that followed immediately upon it. At the same festival also a heifer, which is another word for a cow, as she was led by the high priest to be sacrificed, brought forth a lamb in the midst of the temple. That's awfully strange, isn't it? This is what Josephus said. Again, he would have people around him who said, wait a second, I didn't see that. They didn't say that. Moreover, the eastern gate of the inner temple, which was of brass and vastly heavy, and had been with difficulty shut by 20 men, and rested upon a basis armed with iron, and had bolts fastened very deep into the firm floor, which was there made of one entire stone, was seen to be opened of its own accord about the 6th hour of the night. Now those that kept watch in the temple came hereupon running to the captain of the temple and told him of it, who then came up thither, and not without great difficulty was able to shut the gate again. This also appeared to the vulgar to be a very happy prodigy, as if God did thereby open them the gate of happiness. But the men of learning understood it, that the security of their holy house was dissolved of its own accord, and that the gate was opened for the advantage of their enemies. So these publicly declared that the signal foreshadowed the desolation that was coming upon them. Again, the temple was destroyed in the year 70. Besides these, a few days after the feast, on the 21st day of the month Artemisis, or GR, a certain prodigious and incredible phenomenon appeared. I suppose the account of it would seem to be a fable, were it not related by those that saw it, and were not the events that followed it of so considerable a nature as to deserve such signals. For before sunsetting, chariots and troops of soldiers in their armor were seen running among the clouds and surrounding of cities. Moreover, at that feast, which we call Pentecost, as the priests were going by night into the inner court of the temple, as their custom was to perform their sacred ministrations, they said that in the first place, they felt a quaking and heard a great noise. And after that, they heard a sound of a great multitude saying, let us remove hence. Ooh, scary. But what is still more terrible, there was one Jesus, the son of Ananias, a plebeian and a husbandman. Now, this is not referring to Jesus Christ, obviously. A lot of people were named Jesus in the first century. But here's what he said, who 4 years before the war began in the 60s, and at a time when the city was in very great peace and prosperity, came to the feast, whereupon it is our custom for everyone to make tabernacles to God in the temple, began on a sudden to cry out aloud, a voice from the east, a voice from the west, a voice from the four winds, a voice against Jerusalem and the holy house, a voice against the bridegrooms and the brides, and a voice against this whole people. This was his cry as he went about day and by night in all the lanes of the city. However, certain of the most eminent among the populace had great indignation at his dire cry of his, and took up the man and gave him a great number of severe stripes. Yet did not he either say anything for himself or anything peculiar to those that chastised him, but went on with the same words which he cried before. Hereupon our rulers, supposing, as the case proved to be, that this was a sort of divine fury in the man, brought him to the Roman procurator, where he was whipped till his bones were laid bare. Yet he did not make any supplication for himself, nor shed any tears, but turning his voice to the most lamentable tone possible. At every stroke of the whip, his answer was, woe, woe to Jerusalem. And when Albinus, for he was then our procurator, asked him who he was and whence he came and why he uttered such words, he made no manner of reply to what he said, but still did not leave off his melancholy ditty, till Albinus took him to be a madman and dismissed him. Now, during all the time that passed before the war began, this man did not go near any of the citizens, nor was seen by them while he said so, but he every day uttered these lamentable words as if it were his premeditated vow, woe, woe to Jerusalem. Nor did he give ill words to any of those who beat him every day, nor good words to those who gave him food. But this was his reply to all men, and indeed no other man than a melancholy presage of what was to come. This cry of his was the loudest at the festivals, and he continued his ditty for 7 years and 5 months without growing hoarse or being tired therewith, until the very time that he saw his presage in earnest fulfilled in our siege. When it ceased, for he was going round upon the wall, he cried out with his utmost force, woe, woe to the city again, and to the people, and to the holy house. And just as he added the last, woe, woe to myself also, there came a stone out of one of the engines, and smote him and killed him immediately. And as he was uttering the very same presages, he gave up the ghost. So very fascinating stuff. I want to say hi to Harry Stark. And so I see we've got Harry Stark, David Ridgway. What do we have here? Harry Stark says, and I'm going to read these comments here. One reason for the blindness is they were corrupt and wanted power. Another reason is that they were influenced by pagan Babylon and pagan Greeks. Another reason they were engaging in the occult. Yeah, these are all good reasons. It's very unfortunate, but people are corrupted by money, power, and sex, and probably it was one of the three. And so that was what we saw. David Ridgway says, that was in 1993. I'm not sure what he's referring to because I don't have the previous quote here. And I'm now 59, but I learned how they just don't accept Jesus as God Almighty. That's why they don't read Isaiah 53. I hear they rip the page out of the Bible. What a shame. That is a shame. Gary Priestley is here. I think the easy answer to your question is that they were skeptical enough, not convinced by the claims. Sounds like a reasonable position. Well, it's interesting because Jesus calls on us to have some faith, and he calls on us to choose to believe, and we make that choice. And so Thomas, you will recall, Thomas doubted Jesus. Jesus had to actually let Thomas put his fingers into his side where he could see the marks and where unfortunately where he had been crucified. David Ridgway, if a rabbi accepts Jesus as the Messiah and has some influence and notoriety, then he will get persecuted by the community. That's very true. And we have seen some Jewish people convert to Jesus, convert to Christianity. It's really wonderful when that does happen. The two Jewish people, unfortunately, who were recently assassinated up in at a Jewish event, the two that were engaged to be married, wonderful couple, were Messianic Jews. They believed in Jesus. And so we know where they are now, heaven. That's where you go. It's where you end up if you believe in Jesus. David Ridgway, Rabbi Daniel Zion, Isaac Lichtenstein, Rabbi Hammam Ephraim, Daniel Landsman, etc., were all persecuted by the community for accepting Jesus as Messiah. They were physically assaulted. Yeah, it's a shame. Jesus said the Pharisees were children of the devil. So we do have a choice. Again, people make their choice. God says that you're choosing basically you're choosing heaven or hell. Really, that's what you're choosing. And so why not choose heaven? Why not choose goodness, purity, light, love? Why not choose the truth? The truth will set you free. And I want to say thank you, John, Taking Back Eden. He says, thank you for the scream. Hit the like button. I love that idea. So yeah, thank you. So in summary, I read you a bunch of scripts that the ancient Jews would have had. Jesus was very surprised that they didn't see. Like he knew that they didn't have the eyes to hear and the ears, or I'm sorry, the eyes to see and the ears to hear. He had predicted that there would be some like the ancient Jews who rejected him in, of course, Isaiah 53. It makes it really clear he'd be pierced for our transgressions, and that God was pleased to see that, and that he would see the light in Isaiah 53:11. He did see the light. That's what the Dead Sea Scrolls say. He would see the light. He saw the light. He was risen. In the book of Psalms, we have many references to that Jesus' friends, his own friends, would betray him. Of course, Judas Iscariot betrayed Jesus. And so we had that kind of thing happen. So, and that the Gentiles, in Isaiah, said the Gentiles would start following Jesus. And many Gentiles did. Of course, some stayed pagans, but many Gentiles followed Jesus and gave up their lives for it. They gave up their lives for Christ. A good example of that is Luke, the gospel author. Luke, according to tradition, was also martyred. So it's very interesting stuff. So we had Gentiles, we had Jewish people come to Jesus. We had some who didn't. We have children of the light, children of Jesus. Jesus said he will never let us go, just like searching for that 99th or 100th lamb. He's going to keep searching for us. The prodigal son leaves. The open arms are there when the prodigal son comes back. There's so many great parables about people coming to Jesus and the way Jesus welcomes you to the truth. And so if any of you are wondering of the way, the truth, and the life, you're wondering why I believe as I do, I've told my story many times, but I believe in Jesus because of all kinds of reasons. I believe for spiritual reasons myself, but also evidential reasons. We have lots of evidence for the resurrection. And some of the best evidence are the testimonies of the earliest followers of Jesus and the way that they gave up their lives for those testimonies. Okay, they were brutally, in many cases, crucified, burned at a stake, eaten by lions. You've got Ignatius of Antioch, who was eaten by lions, again, testifying. He was killed around 107. Polycarp was another one. Both of them were disciples of the Apostle John, and they were both brutally martyred. Irenaeus, Saint Irenaeus, also wrote a whole book called Against Heresies. I recommend book 3 of that. It's an amazing work. He refers to the 4 gospel authors, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, by name, in case you're thinking they're anonymous. Lots of ancient support that they weren't. But anyway, so we've got all of these early, and there were many, many more. I mean, I'm just naming a few. All of the apostles, with the exception of the evangelist John, were martyred according to tradition, some in very gory ways. We also have, of course, other followers who were martyred all the way up until the year 313, when Constantine legalized Christianity. There were many, many spates of people being martyred in pretty gruesome ways. And under particular kings, under particular Roman Empire. Some were worse than others. Nero was one of the most evil. And so what Daniel portended was going to happen to the Jews did happen in the 60s and 70s under Nero, in the 60s and the year 70 under Nero. And it's pretty horrible stuff. And then, of course, there were some other ones after him, like Diocletian and some other very evil Roman emperors who persecuted Christians in horrible ways. You had Pliny the Younger write to the Emperor Trajan about how they were persecuting Christians. Those who refused to recant Jesus were martyred. And of course, they were probably surprised about that. So Harry Mark says, Justin Martyr documented that Pharisees were intentionally corrupting the Hebrew text, and we have manuscripted evidence for this. Yeah, in his dialogue with Trypho, we do, unfortunately. And that's one of the reasons why, during Jesus' time, they had the Septuagint, and a really good example of intentional corruption. It happens with Isaiah 7:14, because in the Septuagint, it refers to the virgin will give birth, will conceive. And in the Masoretic text, which was finalized around the year 1000 after Jesus, 1,000 years after Jesus, the Masoretic text had changed that to a young maiden. But it wouldn't be a surprise for a young maiden to get pregnant. That's a given. Young maidens get pregnant all the time. Instead, it was a virgin will get pregnant. That was the surprise. And that was something that the ancient Jews decided to sort of remove. They also use the word ka'ari and ka'aru. Ka'aru refers to his hands and his feet being pierced in Psalm 22:16. And some of them actually now if you look at some of the Jewish texts, it says, instead of it says his hands and feet were pierced, it says like a lion, hands and feet. It's like a noun with hands and feet. It doesn't even make sense. So they intentionally corrupted that. Now, according to what I've read from numerous others and people who are scholars who can read the ancient texts, like Dr. Michael Brown, they have pointed out that in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the word's pretty clear. His hands and feet were pierced. It's the ka'aru. So Polycarp was burned at the stake at the hands of the Pharisaic Jews. Yeah, it's a real shame. Again, money corrupts, unfortunately. And so the Septuagint uses the word ankelos, which means virgin. I thought I used the word parthenos, but I've been wrong before. So anyway, I want to say thank you to everybody for coming in. Again, I was just giving you evidence that the ancient Jews would have had. Some converted, like Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea. They were Pharisees who converted. Gamaliel pointed out, he was also a good one who noticed that if it's a true faith, that you won't be able to stop it. And of course, probably the best example of an ancient Jew who converted to Christianity, who was a Pharisee, was Paul, the Apostle Paul, on the road to Damascus. He was busy blurting out things against Christians. He had got his papers to kill Christians. And suddenly he's struck down by a great light. And he hears, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And Saul says, who are you, Lord? I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. So he was blinded for a period of time. And he fasted. And he repented. And he became probably one of the most strong believers of Christianity, who wrote probably 11 books in the New Testament. He's an amazing author. He understood rabbinic Judaism, not rabbinic, I shouldn't say. He understood the Pharisaic Judaism quite well and came to Christianity, and he lost his life for it. He was beheaded under Nero. So thank you, everybody. I hope you had a great day. And Harry says Parthenos. It is Parthenos. So that is the word. Yeah, there were examples of that, and it's just a real shame, unfortunately. From what I understand, a lot of Jewish people come to Christianity when they do read Isaiah 53. And Isaiah 53 was a major reason for my own eyes being opened. And so I would encourage you, if you do nothing else today and you've never actually looked at that passage, take a look And if I have Jewish friends here, take a look, please, my Jewish friends. There are so many reasons to come to Christianity. Jesus is the fulfillment of your scriptures, and he's pure love, pure light, pure love. And as it says in 1 John, God is love. God is love. All right. So thank you. You guys have a wonderful day. Yeah, God bless that pastor. I was told by a pastor on a plane, who am I referring to? So you remember that story? He's like, he's pierced for our transgressions. I'm like, oh, where in the New Testament is that? It's Jesus. What? It's in the Old Testament. It's like crazy. There were so many passages referring to Jesus in the Old Testament. You guys, once you look at it, you can't unsee it. It's amazing. So if you like this kind of content, please like and subscribe and do come again. And just remember, whether you eat, drink, or whatever you do it all for the glory of God. Thank you, everybody.